Hey everybody, Count Angmar VHS here, and today I wanted to take a moment to talk about progress on the mod Wainriders. This is a project that you may be familiar with if you have followed the channel. In a nutshell, it is set in the Third Age of Middle-earth during the Wainrider invasions. This is about, I guess it's like 1,000+ years prior to the events of the War of the Ring, but it's a very interesting period in Middle-earth history that saw the incursion from the east of a large and powerful Easterling force known as the Wainriders. It's also a time when you had the witch realm of Angmar really approaching its height. You had the kingdom of Arthedain just barely hanging on. And because it's set in the Third Age, that allows us to get into some other non-Mannish factions. For example, we have 3 elven factions. We have 3 factions that are capable of training dwarves. 2 of those also men alongside them. We have an Orcish faction. We, of course, have Angmar, who's capable of training Orcs. So there's a lot of different stuff going on to sort of take this mod out of the realm of being a sub-mod. It's sometimes people will refer to it as a sub-mod. I myself have done that in the past. But really, it's a very different creature from the Fourth Age Total War. So if you want a little bit more background on the mod, there's a couple things you can do. One, you can just take a look at the videos on the channel here that sum up all the different factions. You'll find a video for each faction, and that will sort of go over the unit roster, give you a sense of what that faction can recruit. There's also some videos talking more generally about the Wainriders. I've got a fairly lengthy video on just strictly the lore of the period. Then I've got another video just discussing the campaign, broadly speaking. So that's one way to take a look at what you can expect from the mod. Another way, of course, is to read the sources. If you go to the appendices of the Return of the King, you will find, I think it's Appendix A, goes into most detail about the Wainrider invasion. I think it's only a couple of pages in that appendix, but it also touches on some things that are relevant to the time period of the mod. So we're starting around the 1860s in the Third Age, and you can basically take a look around the map of Middle-earth and through the appendices and the Tale of Years and so on, kind of figure out what was going on in each of the corners of the realm. The other source that would be most useful would be Unfinished Tales, Kirion and Eorl. That chapter talks about the Wainriders, and that goes into actually more detail than the appendices do. I want to say maybe 10 pages or so. So not a great amount, but certainly sources that we go back to again and again just to make sure we've got the lore just right. But with regards to the mod, we have done some previews, of course, and if you've followed the Discord for Fourth Age Total War, you know that there is a channel for the Wainriders, and sometimes we get on there and talk about what we're doing. But we don't update all the time. We don't have a frequent or regular update schedule to keep people aware of what's going on, and there's a few reasons for that. One is simply that it takes effort to do, right? And so there's if there's any energy that we have for mod-related stuff, we'd rather spend that on working on the mod rather than coming up with a way to describe what we're doing on the mod. For example, right now, I'm basically procrastinating from writing descriptions for buildings that should appear in the mod. I should be doing that. I'm sorry, guys, but I figured I could just take some time out and just talk into a microphone for a little while. So that's one sense, that updates take effort, they take time. The other thing, though, is updates are not always valid, right? So as the mod progressed, we made changes, right? And that's something that is ongoing. And so one of the things that we repeatedly do is sort of examine the decisions that we've made. And as we come up with, new mechanics, or as we begin to implement mechanics, we have to really consider how they're going to affect other things. How are they going to affect the recruitment plans for certain factions? How are they going to affect the buildings, traits, things like that? And how is it all going to be coded in a way that is not going to drive our coder insane? So we have to keep being flexible, I guess you should say. So in other words, if I give an update that says, here is what you're going to see in X, and then it comes out and it's completely different, what's the point of that update, right? It served no purpose. So at any rate, that's kind of why we're not seeing a lot. The other reason is that the work that we've been doing lately on the mod is of a more conceptual nature, more abstract, you could say. It's not like when we had the unit rosters, I could get into a custom battle and just show you a video of that. And happy to do that. But when we're talking about mechanics, how do we show the mechanic, right? especially when the mechanic is not yet implemented, because we want to make sure that it's going to work out well, and then we would need to implement it, and then we would want to test it. So there's a lot of things that mitigate against more or less constant updates. Just to give you a general sense of the problem, so to speak, though, one of the things that we've been talking about relatively recently is what happens when factions expand beyond their initial borders, like beyond their homelands, to use a term that may be familiar to those of you who play 4th Age Total War. In 4th Age Total War, a faction has homelands. Beyond those homelands, you've got territory that represents kind of, maybe less of a familiar place, right? These are the fiefdoms. And then maybe even beyond them, you've got outlands. These are places that the faction has no history, no involvement with. And so you can expect things to work differently in those regions. In a homeland, a faction is going to get its full native roster, right? Think of the Reunited Kingdom. In their homelands in like Gondor and Arnor, you can get your men-at-arms, your longbowmen, the sort of classic iconic unit roster from the militia guys all the way to the very top. Outside those homelands, though, different choices start to open up depending on where you expand to. If you expand into Rune in the east, you're going to find that those first couple tiers of military buildings are not going to bring you Gondorian-style troops at all. They're going to give you Easterling-style troops, those low-level warband skirmishers and so on. If you expand into Harad, you're going to see Haradrian-style troops at those initial military levels. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So we've got the unit rosters for the factions, generally speaking, roughly finished. But what we don't have finished is what is going to be the options for all these factions as they expand. Another thing to consider is not just what do factions find when they expand, but what can players do when they expand. This is one thing that 4th Age does. It forces you to make a choice, right? When you have a new settlement and you're building it up from the ground up, you do need to decide, are you going to devote this province to military stuff and you can build all your highest level barracks, or are you going to devote it to, like, say, an economic policy where you can build the highest level traders and other types of buildings that will help your economy? Those two policy options are mutually exclusive, and certain factions get other options. But the point is, you do have decisions that you need to make when you expand. You also have, for certain factions, specialization buildings, only one of which can be made in any given settlement, and so you need to make another choice there. With Wainriders, though, we anticipate having, I guess I could say, more choices available to the player. Not simply a matter of what kind of policy do you want to pursue, but how do you want to treat or negotiate with the local people that you are conquering. Do you want to just subjugate them outright and treat them like a conqueror, right? Not allowing them to run their own affairs. You have an ironclad fist ruling that province. That will give certain benefits, but as you might imagine, there will be certain downsides to that approach as well. On the other hand, maybe you want to establish more of a client-type kingdom with this new province you've conquered. You allow them to run their own affairs to a certain extent. Maybe that gives you less direct control, but it can give you some other benefits, maybe even some unique options. So we need to figure out how this is going to work, and remember that this is all taking place not just during the Age of Men like the Fourth Age was, but during a very different time in Middle-earth's history. It's still the Third Age, so the elves are, dwindling, but we have 3 elven factions. We got, those 3 dwarven factions. We've got the Orcs, Angmar as well. So we've got to figure out how all these different elements can work together and sort of devise unified systems for them. So I hope that gives you some sense of the kind of things that we're working on. And I may have described it as a problem. These are problems we're working on. But I mean that in the best sense. These are sort of interesting things to consider. And, as a team, for me at any rate, I just love working with these ideas and, getting into the lore and sort of thinking about these things. And for all of us, this is a hobby, right? This is not a full-time job for any of us. And so, to some extent, that is sort of why we're not seeing a ton of frequent updates. It's not that we're not working on the mod. We certainly are. We're having lively and interesting discussions about how we want Wainriders to develop. and coming up with new mechanics and then implementing those things. But again, it's not something that is easy to show. Now, as we do get things that we will be able to show, I will be happy to present videos describing those. When we get to the point where we can reveal the campaign map in all its glory, I'll be doing that for sure. We can maybe walk through certain factions and look at the kind of building options they may have and so on. But we'll also be, we'll need to be testing and ironing out all of these details as they are implemented. So we do have, a ways to go. Arthedain, the team member who is mostly responsible for, the coding, the implementation of these mechanics, and in many cases is the originator of these mechanics, estimated on our Discord that we were maybe 85% of the way to completion. And I have no way of knowing, right? I'm basically the writer of the team. But that sounds somewhat reasonable to me. Now, from my point of view, I've got a lot of writing to do. There's a ton still remaining to be done. But that's not, holding up the development of the mod, at least at this point. But I do need to get my butt in gear. So with that, I think I'll end the video here. Feel free to leave any comments to, if you have questions about anything specific. I won't be able to get into a great deal of detail to answer any of those questions because we are currently developing answers to some of those questions that you may ask. And, again, I want to wait until things are ready to be revealed before I jump the gun. But I do enjoy the discussion. I can't wait to show you more of the mod as we continue our work on it. And I hope you enjoyed a little bit of insight in thinking about what Wainriders may have in store. So until the next time, everybody, take care.